I'm Michael Bungay-Stanier. This is Change Signal. This is the podcast where we cut through the blather and the BS and the noise to find the good stuff that works in change. Now, if you're a transformational leader seeking modern change mastery, this will be your favorite podcast. When you hear the word ritual, what comes to mind? Is it all a bit woo-woo, and weird, and mystical?
You cannot escape ritual. You might want to. You might not be religious. You might not, be a product of your culture in your mind. We cannot escape how ubiquitous rituals are in our lives.
So Mike Norton is a professor at Harvard Business School. So he is not a woo-woo guy. And Mike is on a quest to unweird ritual. His book is The Ritual Effect. And this is a conversation that teases apart the difference between habits and ritual. It delves into the idea of ambiguous loss. This is a really powerful bit of the conversation. And it starts to unpack how best to create new rituals as we go through organizational change. Mike, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so ritual. When I first come to ritual, I've got two reactions. One is it's too much incense and too much woo-woo and too many caftans. And the other involves bloodthirsty sacrificing of small animals. And honestly, I don't want either of those in my organizational context. So start off by making ritual feel normal for me. How do you think about ritual?
It's true that the thing that comes to mind with that word, as you said, does have a lot of baggage. And it tends to be cultural rituals or religious rituals that are handed down through time.
Right.
And those play an incredibly important role in our lives. So they're not the kind that I was interested in, but they serve many, many functions for humans and are really, really important.
Yeah.
I was interested in the kind of rituals that are the kind that people do kind of under the surface in their everyday lives. Sometimes they're not even aware that they're doing them. And when we started to look around at people's lives, we kept finding domain after domain after domain of life, where in one way or another, people were engaged in rituals, not people in robes with candles, not that kind of ritual,
Right.
But small behaviors that meant a lot to them, that they repeated over time, that they made sure to do it in the exact same way. And that was the thing that hooked me on maybe rituals are not only the kind that we usually think of, but this other common kind that drive everyday life.
Explain to me the difference between a ritual and a habit, because they sound, the way you've set it up, which is these everyday actions. James Clear wrote a book on habit. I wrote a book called The Coaching Habit. So there's a whole industry going, habits are the things.
Can I ask you a silly question as part of that?
Yeah.
When you get ready in the morning or when you are getting ready to go to bed, do you take a shower first and then brush your teeth? Or do you brush your teeth and then take a shower?
I don't bathe. I don't wash. No, I'm kidding. I will typically brush my teeth first in the morning and then shower.
Okay.
And then in the evening, if I shower in the evening, I will shower and then brush my teeth last.
Okay. So in the morning, if you think about your order, brush teeth and then shower. Tomorrow morning, if I said, do you mind doing it in a different order? Do you mind flipping those tomorrow morning? Before you leave for work or whatever, before you start the podcast, will you shower and then brush your teeth? Two options. That seems completely fine. Why would I care?
Yeah.
Or something feels a little strange about that and I can't quite even say why, but I don't really want to do it.
Yeah, that's weird. Like, I can't tell you why that's weird, but it feels weird. Why would you even suggest that?
Yeah. So about half of people choose the first option. They say, why would I care?
Yeah.
It's brushing my teeth. What difference does it make when I do it in the day? And for me, that makes those more toward habits. There are things that you get done every day because you need to get them done.
Right.
But exactly how and exactly when aren't that big of a deal. They're usually not that emotional. We can feel good when we complete them.
That's interesting.
But they're not filled with a lot of meaning for most people.
In fact, you're actually trying to remove emotion and meaning because you want to kind of go, look, I just want to get this done. And if I'm trying to move into setting up habits, I'm trying to remove the resistance or whatever I might feel around it to make it feel there's no emotion attached to it. There's not even thought attached to it. It's just a process that happens.
Completely automatic is the goal for, that's like the gold standard of habit. And by the way, Good habits are great.
Yeah.
I just want to be super clear. I'm not opposed to having good habits. I wish I had good habits too. But about half of people have the reaction you did, which was, I'd rather not switch the order of those two. And if we probe for a while, they say in the end what you said, I don't know why, but I don't want to. And for me, that moves it from, it's not just the behaviors themselves.
Right.
It's not a checklist. It's how you do them. The order in which you do them matters. It moves toward being not only kind of an automatic habit, but something with a little more emotion and a little more meaning. Way down the continuum is people in robes with incense.
Right, I get that.
Sacrificing animals. This area of the continuum is the one that I actually got super interested in because it's so common in everything that we're up to.
And what purpose does ritual serve?
I think they serve a bunch. So one of the things that we see rituals doing is they actually allow us to experience a really wide array of emotions. And they're oddly enough, we use them for even completely opposite things. So for example, people use rituals to get themselves really amped up.
Right.
And they also use rituals to try to calm themselves down. Or we use rituals at weddings and we use them at funerals.
Yeah.
So across all of these domains of life, it's not that we're looking for the same emotion each time. Sometimes we're looking for calm, sometimes joy, sometimes connection. But for whatever reason, there's a quirk in humans that rituals tend to be something that can trigger these many different kinds of emotions. And that actually makes them really useful.
Yeah.
And it's probably why humans have been doing them for thousands and thousands of years.
Right.
Because they can play this role in our lives.
What else do I need to know about ritual to kind of start a conversation with you around how it might play out in organizational life, particularly as an organization changes and evolves?
I think that in the same way the word ritual conjures up the animal sacrifice and things like that, in organizational contexts, it tends to conjure up corporate retreats and like trust falls. That tends to be what people think of, that their manager saw some TED talk over the weekend, and then she comes in and says, now we all have to do this, from now on, and it's a nightmare. So the response from employees and organizations is, oh my God, I can't believe this guy is here and he does ritual stuff.
Right.
And it's my first thing to do with organizations is to say that in the same way it's not people in robes with candles, it's not that either. And in fact, the kinds of rituals that I'm interested in are the ones that you come up with yourself. That they're not a top-down kind of management is telling you, you must do this and that. The kind that I find interesting and that we can see predict lots of positive work outcomes are the kind actually that employees come up with themselves or teams come up with themselves. Very idiosyncratic, very quirky, very interesting. That's the kind I think that I'm always interested in exploring.
I don't want to let this qualification from Mike slip by, because up to now, I've been thinking of rituals as big and standard and institutional and kind of sweeping. But Mike is pointing us to small and quirky. I mean, I love the word idiosyncratic. It's a great word because it means distinctive and it means local. So the game here is not to find the big organizational ritual, but the many, many different rituals for the many, many different units of people who might be going through change. And that's what I wanted to get into further with Mike. So where that takes me is a sense that rituals are often localized in smaller groups. Part of the challenge with change is it tends to be scaled at next level or two up from the team unit. How do you navigate that kind of difference in scale of impact? We're reorging 10,000 people. Teams are 5 to 10 people. So there's like at least 1,000 teams here, probably each one with their own idiosyncrasies.
There's a wonderful case study of a merger. I can say it's amazing research because it's not mine, basically. And they look at a practice during a merger. What they have employees do is they write something that they value about the company on a Post-it note.
Yeah.
And then they put all the Post-it notes up on a wall, a huge wall with all the things they value. And they're very idiosyncratic because what I value about my company may be very different than what you value about the same exact company.
Right.
But when you have all of these Post-its up, what you can see is some themes start to emerge. So even though my specific thing might be very unique to me or to my team, you see across organizations sometimes themes come out, and then you can use those themes to think, there's actually some things we have in common across our teams and across their teams. Let's use those as a starting point to think about new practices.
One idea that I think is really talked about in change is the idea of grief, the idea of loss.
Okay.
I mean, it's an uncomfortable conversation. We don't really love talking about loss at the best of times.
Completely.
And, it's hard to know whether that's something that should be coming up at work. So is grief being too dramatic in terms of the emotions people feel when change happens in their organization?
You can see people, for example, some research on Lehman Brothers after the unfortunate
disaster.
end of that company. And, people will years and years later still have their business cards.
Right.
And on the one hand, that's trash because you can't use it and it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, you absolutely can understand why people would hang on to those business cards because it was a big part of their identity. And it is a real loss. And again, losing your job, of course, is a terrible thing, and that has its own consequences.
Yeah.
But these other kinds of losses, this other kind of grief that you're referring to, is in fact real for people. And they do grieve not just the job they had, but the culture that they were in, or those little practices that they used to do with their team.
What do I need to understand about grief, Mike? It's often it's not talked about, or if it is talked about, it's kind of talked about just like I'm doing. It's like, oh, it's grief. But I realize how little I really know about grief. I'm wondering what you can teach me.
One of the things about studying rituals is that people share their stories with you. And I'm sure there's a million types of grief, but there's two kinds of grief that really emerge. And one is the kind that we usually think of. And there's another kind that's just as hard, but we don't have good words for it. So the kind that we think of is, somebody dies and we grieve, or we lose our job and we grieve.
Yeah.
There's a discrete event that happens that we feel sad about and we have to cope with it.
Right.
And those are devastating, and we use ritual there for sure. But there's this other category of grief. The term that's used by psychologists is ambiguous loss, which is it's not quite clear what has been lost, or it hasn't been lost yet. So for example, people with parents who have a degenerative disease like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's.
Right. Yeah.
Their loved one is alive, but they've lost them. We don't have anything for that. We don't have any ceremony or anything along the way to help people through those. And like losing, your business card that you hang on to, it's not clear what was lost.
Right.
You can't put your finger on it in the way we can some other, if I lost my keys, they're gone. Now I know I lost my keys. But this kind, I think, actually are often the ones that people struggle with the most.
Right.
Because they are ambiguous and because we're not quite sure what to do with them. And finally, because we don't have good social support for those kinds of losses. A funeral is very, very useful because it brings everybody together for social support. Ambiguous loss, nobody gathers and nobody gathers to help. They love you, they would if you asked, but we just don't have kind of the frameworks for it.
As an aside, I'm remembering when I stopped being CEO at Box of Crayons, or actually when I decided to stop being CEO. Now, Box of Crayons is the training company that I founded to kind of teach the insights and the lessons from the Coaching Habit book. Now, it took us 18 months to set up Shannon, who's the new CEO, into that role. And we worked really hard at that. We worked really hard at her transition. But we didn't do a particularly good job at managing me losing a significant part of my identity, not just as the CEO of Box of Crayons, but the guy connected to the coaching habit. I mean, I'd spent 18 years building this company up, building this identity, and suddenly I wasn't going to be part of it anymore. I didn't really know how to process this because I wanted change to happen, but also it hadn't really yet happened. It just was going to happen. And I knew I was losing something. It was a really clear experience for me now, I realize, of ambiguous loss. If you're enjoying this conversation with Michael Norton, you can find him at his website, michaelnorton.com, and his book, The Ritual Effect, in all the usual places you find books. How would you support somebody through ambiguous loss?
It's funny because when we started studying grief, we were thinking about the first kind, a death and then what happens. When you have a loss like that, one of the things that people feel in addition to other negative things, is a lack of control.
Right.
Which is purely something happened in the world that I did not want to happen, and there was nothing that I could do to stop it. And that feeling of lack of control is its own part of grief.
Yeah.
It's different from sadness, actually. It's a different sort of feeling.
Oh, that's interesting.
And with ambiguous loss, it's the same, that this is an ongoing thing that you can't control. And if there's one thing that humans hate, it's feeling like we can't control what's happening around us.
Right.
The older you get, the more you realize we don't control anything. Because,
yeah, exactly.
But we like to feel that sense of control.
Right.
And so I do think people often come up with little rituals to help them through the ambiguous kinds of losses along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Very, again, not to use the word, but it really is the right word, very idiosyncratic sorts of rituals to help them through these sorts of losses.
And I can imagine perhaps rituals that in some way reinforce a sense of, if not control, then agency in the moment.
One of my favorite examples of a grief ritual, a woman wrote, very simply, she wrote, "I washed his car every weekend the way that he used to do."
Oh, that's fantastic.
Devastating.
Yeah.
I don't even need to explain it. Everything is right in
Exactly.
there.
It's like this perfect short story. It's a one-sentence short story. Yeah.
Completely. And it's every weekend. So it's agency, to your point. I'm doing something active in order to grieve this person that I cared about. I almost hate explaining because it speaks for itself, but you see how, and I wouldn't say, hey, everybody, make sure you wash a car every weekend after you, it doesn't make any sense, but for her, you can feel how meaningful it is.
How do I begin to design ritual? What are the things I know to create a ritual that feels useful, grounded, and it strikes the right tone for what's needed?
Depends a little bit kind of which domain of life you're sort of looking for help. If it's, anxiety versus grief versus social connection.
I'm trying to help people who are leading change. So I'm like a change leader. I'm like, okay, I'm going to buy Mike's book. But after I've done that, I need to try and create a process that will help people let go of what they're leaving behind so they're more able to cross the threshold into what awaits them. So where would I start? How would you help that person?
I'm going to start in a very different domain, but then I'll bring it back, I promise. So we have...
Perfect. Love that.
If you think of blended families where people are divorced with kids and then they remarry and each person has their own kids. And then it's the first holiday, Christmas, or in the US, Thanksgiving is a big family holiday.
Yeah, of course.
And the question is, what do you do? Right? Because our family had this thing that we did, and their family had this thing that they did. And the blow-ups that can happen around these events, they're really pretty profound because, of course, it's like you're telling me my family is wrong. We don't deal well with that.
Right. And it's kind of sacred space, or it has been in terms of deeply ritualistic form of gathering.
And, people will say, how, they eat the turkey at 2:00 in the afternoon. They're insane.
Barbarians.
It's such a funny thing. They don't have any apple pie. I can't talk to these people. And the thing that is most valuable, and we touched on this earlier, is the successful way to do it is to take some traditions from one family, some traditions from another family, and then come up with new traditions for the new family.
Right.
If you leave any of those steps out, it's going to fail. Because if you only pull from the past, you're not creating any new identity for the new group.
Right.
And we think again about, two teams that have to merge, or I'm a manager. What is in place already?
Yeah.
Please do not get rid of all of it. Like that.
Right.
If there's any message, be aware that people care about these things that you couldn't care less about, but they care a lot about them.
Mm-hmm.
But then also start thinking of ways, well, what could we do that's new that we might bring to bear that creates this new identity while honoring the past?
One of the challenges that comes to mind for me, Mike, is you've got ways of acting and behaving that show up at a certain level. And then you've got deeper currents that drive the ways people behave. And I'm thinking of a merger I was involved in years ago, a pharmaceutical company that became AstraZeneca. And effectively, I remember trying to facilitate a meeting which had Americans in the room, Swedes in the room, and Brits in the room. and it was just unworkable because they just have very different perspectives on how a meeting works. The Swedes are like, we have to come to consensus. The Americans are like, just make a goddamn decision. I'm a decider around here. The Brits were just sarcastic about everything. And I'm wondering, do you have any perspective on how ritual can shape some of those deeper anchors, if that's the right word?
At the very start, we touched on kind of the cultural rituals and religious rituals that we receive from the past, but they almost always are a reflection of our current culture as well. They hold values in them that are very important. So countries that are kind of more communal or collectivistic, their rituals reflect that. And countries that are more like the US, like independent and individualist and those things, their rituals tend to reflect that as well.
Right.
And we do bring those to bear in all aspects of our lives, in our close relationships and our relationships at work. And so there is a sense in which it's true that we are now at work, and work is supposed to be its own thing that humans do that is not related to cultural things from thousands of years ago. It's supposed to be separate. But of course, we bring that culture forward with us into everything we do in life.
Yeah.
And that one of the key things is to start trying to be more aware of how you're bringing it forward in life. So in the example that you gave, it's not that Swedes don't know they're supposed to come to consensus.
Right.
They can articulate that pretty clearly. If you say, what was wrong with the meeting, they would say this idiot American started spouting off about whatever. But then the question is, well, how do we help them be aware of that and then work it into the dynamic? And for the American too, is, I'm the decider. How do we get that person to be aware of what they're bringing? Their way isn't the correct way. It's just a way.
Yeah.
So the meeting doesn't go badly if it doesn't go the way that you're used to. But you're trying to find this middle ground of, can we all get some part of how we think, what we think meetings are, in a sense? Can all of us get some elements of that into how we run this show?
Mike, can you give me, I'm loving this conversation, but I want to ground it for some change leaders who are like, but what can you just, maybe even a scale of like, what's a tiny ritual that's proved helpful for change? What's a more ornate, elaborate ritual that may play a similar role? What do these things look like?
Super helpful question. So when we ask teams, for example, about their rituals, except we don't say rituals, we ask them different questions. The things that they come up with are, I would say, almost always very mundane. They're not, when I say idiosyncratic, we tend to think idiosyncratic means crazy. It doesn't. It just means specific to the person. It could be the most boring thing in the world, and you're the only one who does it,
Right, you're right.
And so, for example, a team that we studied, their ritual was around lunchtime, which is very, very common for teams. And what they would do was, it was a 5-person team, and one day of the week, each person was responsible for lunch.
Right.
So I would do Monday, and then you would do Tuesday, and then whoever else would do the other day.
Yeah.
And they all ate together in the break room. And I love that ritual because everybody eats lunch. They're not doing something extraordinary or odd or anything like that.
Yeah.
But when you probe a little deeper, what that ritual does is it means that one day of the week, I take care of everyone on my team.
Right.
And every other day of the week, someone on my team literally takes care of me with food, which for humans that's the best currency in the world.
Everything. Yeah.
And this team, it's reflected in how they feel about each other, right? So all it is lunch, but they transform lunch into something that's much, much more meaningful. And just another quick example that always strikes me, when COVID happened and many people had to start working remotely and teams had to adjust.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about this. Yeah.
Yeah. The question is, do people give up rituals or do they come up with new ones? And one team that we chatted with told us that at the start of every Zoom meeting, everyone would click the emoji that reflected how they were feeling.
Right.
So you'd have, 16, 20 faces on the screen, and I would just get hit with emojis from all of these people.
Yeah.
And what it did, which was amazing, is first it allows me to see the average of the group. If I'm the manager, I can see the average.
So taking the temperature. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I can see maybe this person needs a little follow-up and this person, might not need the follow-up. But what was so interesting was we asked this team, did you do something like this before when you were in person? And they said, no, never.
Right.
And they said, actually, it would have been weird to go around the table and everyone says, I'm happy, or, I'm sad. It's like a counter-normative thing.
Yeah.
So the technology, oddly enough, allowed for them to engage in more emotional behavior with each other because it removes some friction and some barriers. Now, again, to say clicking emojis is a ritual, on the one hand, that's a crazy thing to say.
Right.
And on the other hand, when you see it in context, you can see how it became really, really meaningful really fast for this group of people.
Yeah, I see that.
So it's clicking buttons on Zoom, eating lunch in a room, which we all do. But it's imbuing them with that kind of meaning. That's what creates rituals instead of we're just going through the motions.
And if I'm a change leader trying to think about introducing ritual to help people process it, what are the dumb mistakes I need to avoid?
Key mistake is being top down.
Right.
I think our instinct as managers is to control, speaking of, and to be in charge of all the things and micromanage all the things. And from now on, we're going to start meetings like this. Everybody start meetings like this.
Right.
And of course, you get just like a huge eye roll. We all know that manager.
That's exactly right. I was eye rolling even as you spoke. Yeah,
exactly. And although I will say, funnily enough, those kinds of managers who behave that way, and everyone can think of the ones they've had, the eye roll that happens is in unison. Right. And so bizarrely enough,
brilliant. We've found our ritual. We've created a ritual which is eye rolling towards this crazy manager.
And in fact, we feel closer together now.
Right.
We bonded over something that happened. So if you are that manager, in a weird way, you're accomplishing your goal. It's just at your expense.
Yeah,
yeah, it's like chess, third level kind of chess.
Yeah, exactly.
But that really is the key, is the top down. I mean, when I go to companies and do this, and people think we're going to stand up and say, everybody shout this phrase. This is the thing you have to do from now on.
Yeah.
And I say instead, why don't you get in your teams at tables and just chat about what it is that you do as a team? And people are delighted.
Yeah.
It's like a very fun thing to do, to reflect on what it is that we do with, in a different context with families. Like what happens at dinner in your family? People love to talk about it and dissect it.
Yeah.
And so opening the space, I think, for people to be creative and be generative, the worst mistake is to close that off in any way and think that you're going to run the show.
Okay, just before I wrap this interview up, I'm going to light a candle, raise a glass. Now, as leaders, we help people move from A to B. I mean, some are willing, some less so. And the easier we can make their journey, leaving something behind, crossing a threshold so they can come to something new, the better it is for us all. Enabling people to create their own idiosyncratic rituals to speed them on their journey is a great gift. Now, a small ritual for you, one that I am sure will bring you deep joy, might be sharing your favorite episodes of this podcast on LinkedIn or elsewhere in the world. I mean, I'm kidding, but kind of. Look, I am very grateful for anything you might do to spread the word. I'm looking for transformational leaders who are seeking modern change mastery. That's for whom this podcast is made. And thank you for doing the work. I'm glad you're here.